All right, folks. I read this one, but my review is more of a warning than a recommendation. So I want you to read it if you're interested, but read it with a strongly critical mindset. I read The Great Sex Rescue because I've heard several people either recommend it or recommend another book by these ladies. It was co-written by three women: Joanna Sawatsky, Rebecca Gregoire Lindenbach, and Sheila Wray Gregoire. As an aside, another one of their books is called She Deserves Better. The title is self-explanatory, but granted I haven't read this one. It's a good friend of mine whose marriage was honestly almost destroyed by this book. When we fill our minds with biased information that fuels ours or others' confirmation biases, the impact can be extraordinarily powerful. Okay, so a lot of the couples I meet with in counseling are struggling with sexual intimacy in their marriages, so I'm always on the lookout for good resources to recommend. I'm going to just say from the start that this book scares me a little. From the start, the premise of this book sounds intriguing. It made me nod my head a little bit. Okay, maybe I'm on board. I think we can all agree that men and women have some differences when it comes to sexuality, and that generations past and present struggle in various ways to communicate about sex, to teach about sex, and maybe even to know how to view sex through a healthy lens. Sexuality is an oddity because it's taboo on the one hand, we don't like to talk about it, but it's universal on the other hand. This book attempts to look at sexuality through the lens of Christian women who struggle with sexual intimacy in their marriages. Okay, cool. That's an incredibly good thing. They conducted a huge survey of women asking them about their sex lives, and they based some of the book around those statistics. Great, it's evidence-based info. I like it. They make some good points, such as pointing out that struggles in marital sexuality often have less to do with the act of sex, but more to do with arousal. For instance, sex seems freer flowing when dating because arousal is easier when dating. There's that long anticipation before most sexual contact occurs, or we're abstaining entirely from sexual contact until we're married, which makes the arousal that much greater still. Later in married life, though, arousal tanks because the goal becomes to sneak in a quickie before the kids barge in. Okay, good point. What if we focus on improving arousal and anticipation rather than on the performance act of sex? Good insight. I hadn't thought about it like that before. But the positive teaching and insights I gained were few and far between. The majority of this book seems to be a smear platform for the authors to grind their axes. Now, the axe in question here is the evangelical male patriarchy who have taught and written about marriage and sexuality over the past 50 years. They don't hide the fact that they are appalled at the grievous, outlandish, and maybe even abusive teaching that they reviewed in a lot of the Christian marriage and sex literature throughout past decades. The book spends page after page trashing authors and their books by name, and pointing out that the problem with sexual struggles in marriage is predominantly with the men. But there's more. Some of these poor, simple-minded husbands in our world who are harming their wives oftentimes don't even know any better because they were raised by a culture of toxic, evangelical male church leaders who pointed them to resources that were all but coaching them to abuse their wives. They quote passages from some of these books and even hint at rape in sections to describe what these books are teaching. A major pattern they suggest the Christian literature teaches is the following. Number one, husbands are sexual and they can't help that they need sex all the time. God made them this way. Number two, whether wives like it or not, they must give their husbands sex. And number three, if wives don't give their husbands sex, then it causes men to lust and cheat, and it's the wife's fault if he strays from his marriage. Now, I've read most of the books that they bash. I would like to think that I'm reasonably intelligent. I would also like to believe that my alarms in my brain would go off if I was reading material that was directly or indirectly teaching me to abuse my wife sexually. Reading some of the passages they cite, yeah, some do sound a bit appalling, but I wonder if taken in context, there's more to it than these snippets that they charge these authors with. I've met with hundreds of couples in my counseling practice, many of whom are struggling sexually in their marriages. I've yet to have a wife come to me and say that the main problem is her toxic husband sexually abusing her in their bedroom because he read one of the popular Christian marriage and sex books over the past few decades. It's just way more complex than finding a singular thing to point our finger at. Most husbands and wives I meet are people who love one another dearly and they want nothing more than to please one another. When my friend came to me about the book She Deserves Better, he asked me, scratching his head, "Daniel, am I really this monster that this book tells my wife that I am?" I have to admit that reading The Great Sex Rescue made me feel the same way. Have I been an abuser for my whole marriage and I just never realized it? Well, I asked my wife, and she thankfully reassured me the answer to that is no, of course not. I can't do these ladies' book justice with just a simple, brief review here. Buy it, read it for yourself. I believe in reading things that we disagree with because it sparks conversation and it makes us think critically. And maybe I'm a bit defensive towards some of what I read. I've wondered why that may be. But nonetheless, there seems to be a pattern emerging within the progressive Christian community in pockets where the enemy is not a spiritual enemy at all. The true enemy, they might say, is the past. It's past generations who traumatized us and triggered us with their, again, male, evangelical, patriarchal abuse sexually and maybe theologically. And you know what? If that's true, then yes, we don't need to follow that. Throw it off, rebel, go find freedom. Is it possible, though, that that's not entirely true, that the truth lies somewhere in the middle? Maybe it's not all the men's fault or all the men's responsibility, and maybe it's not all women's fault or all women's responsibility. Maybe we're all more alike than we are different. Maybe we are all sinners in need of rescue from a Savior. Maybe we're all sexually and spiritually broken in our own ways, and we're just trying to do our best to help one another heal and find meaning and purpose and joy and fulfillment in our marriages and our relationships. Maybe even that's what some of the authors over the past 50 years were trying to do, is just help people. Maybe we can seek resources and find the good in them and maybe discard the parts that are not helpful. Eat the meat and spit out the bones. Here's what's important. The importance is that we're communicating about it. We're doing it together, in community, together, because that's how God created us to live, together.